What do a speaking coach, a strategy consultant, and a founder have in common? Sounds like the start of a bad joke, right? But honestly, it's all about finding out what people really do in their jobs. The stories, the struggles, the coffee breaks. The real stuff you won't find in a job title.
Welcome to a space where we sit down with people from all kinds of careers, have a laugh, and dive into what makes their work meaningful. Whether you're looking to learn something new or just here for a good story, let us be your guide. I'm Geoff.
And I'm Charlie.
And let's get
Casually Pro!
Woo! Today, we sit with Jensen. Jennifer, you're the author of Developing Authentic Leaders. With over 25 years of experience in the corporate world, you're helping leaders reveal their full power and avoid getting stuck in the abyss of middle management. You're here to tell us how people can make a difference even when they don't have definite decision power, how they can be seen, and what mistakes they need to avoid to race to the top. Jennifer, I'm super happy to be here with you today. Can you please start by sharing who you are, what you do, and how you got to do what you do?
So thank you for having me. It's an honor and privilege to be here. And so I am a coach slash advisor to individuals in middle management and director level as well, in supporting them to become the best and brightest leaders in the industry. Because right now we have a huge gap. And so my mission is to fill that gap and support the up and coming because they're our succession plan. And the reason I got started doing this was about 5 years ago. I was trapped in leadership chaos, reporting to a hands-off director who provided no structure, a micromanager who cut off me from all essential contacts, and a lazy boss who would take credit for all my work while I protected my team from the dysfunction swirling around us. And just as I started questioning my own leadership identity, everything exploded. New leadership swept in with massive egos and even more toxic behaviors, constantly telling us, oh, it was better at the other company they just came from, and me wondering why weren't they still at that company. And I no longer recognized the person staring back at me in the mirror. And so with all these changes happening, then suddenly I got the news that my dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer and given just months to live. And so my world was spinning out of control at a breakneck speed, and the armor went on very quickly. And I started keeping everybody at arm's length and shifted from like pure survival mode and took on the role of being the rock for the family who everybody came to for everything. And then I got a phone call from somebody very close to me who said, Jennifer, be careful not to become so disconnected that you lose sight of yourself and who you are and stop caring about the people around you. That initially made me, it was a physical blow, and it made me angry because how was I not being caring? How was I not being supportive to everyone? It felt like an unfair accusation. And then the realization hit me. I was becoming as cold as the rock that I had made myself into. And in my determination to handle everything efficiently, I had stopped seeing the people around me as individuals with their own pain and needs. And I was bulldozing through situations, making decisions without considering the others needed time to process, to feel heard, to be part of the journey rather than just passengers in my plan. And when I started recognizing that pattern, the armor started to fall off. And then I started to realize I had missed one big important issue in this whole process, and that was me. And so I had to rediscover who I was, and counseling became a lifeline. And that helped take off the rest of the armor. And I started getting friends saying it's good to see Jennifer back again after all the trauma that I had experienced. And I started continuing to rebuild myself and a sense of who I am and who my leadership was. And I was then encouraged to write a book for leaders. And I took 6 months off work and began writing, which became my lifeline back to discovering my authentic self. And because I'd been through everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and those hard earned lessons needed to be shared.
Wow, that is a tremendous story and a tremendous amount of difficulty and pain that you endured to kind of figure out your place and your purpose now. Um, something just struck me while you were talking, and it granted it's at the very beginning, but it's relevant now. Uh, Leadership, I think, is oftentimes put into very technical and analytical terms, right? The idea is it's mostly geared as a method of efficiency and figuring out, okay, how do you get the most bang for your buck, essentially, when you're talking about the people investment. But there is something uh, incredibly moving about hearing someone talk about not just uh, you know, building this level of efficiency, but saying that you would protect your team, right? You would talk to your team and you would create an environment that's not just efficient, but safe. So I just wanted to give you kudos for being able to not just explain it in such a great way, but also talk about the more human elements of leadership that we kind of rarely touch on. But kind of going to more of your purpose here and what you're doing now. Uh, you mentioned that you help build authenticity for leaders. And I think that's a really charged term. It's very tied to jargon now, unfortunately, where people kind of get a sense of what it might mean contextually, but maybe they don't understand what it means in kind of the facet of leadership. Can you talk to us about what authenticity means to you and maybe how you bring it into your work?
So, authenticity to me is really understanding who I am and why I respond the way that I do, and also understanding what is my values and my beliefs and setting those boundaries around to ensure that I can stay true to myself. Because in the business world and as leaders, you're constantly told to be a certain mold or act a certain way. But what if it goes against who you are? And how can you set yourself apart and protect you as an individual so that you don't lose who you are?
Jennifer, I would like to go even deeper in this. You said something very interesting when you presented yourself, that when you were in this corporate environment, you saw people around you being toxic and even not recognizable because of what they did. So I assume this is something that is extremely pervasive in a corporate environment. By the way, I'm very interested by this discussion with you because I personally never was in a corporate environment. So everything that I know about it is something that I heard. I was a freelancer for almost all my career, which is maybe why I never lost my authenticity. Though I still had to find it, and it was a long process. But every once in a while I think, yeah, maybe also that's the reason why you can be so you, because you never had the external pressure to act as someone else. That being said, let's go back to the people who are listening to this episode and who might be in this situation, who might be the ones that are doing toxic behaviors, without even knowing that they are doing them. Could you tell us about how you got this awareness about you, how you knew that you were acting in a way that wasn't you, and what process did you follow to find this authentic you?
So for me, I have been always very much aware of how individuals respond in various situations because I would watch them in meetings and I had trained myself to understand body language. But to go through the experience that I did, that was a whole different level of finding out who I was. And that's where counseling came in to understand who I was again, because I didn't know anymore. Who was Jennifer? Was she the one that was advocating for her dad, or was she the one who was protecting her team? Like, who was I? And so that's where counseling and talking it through and figuring out where my boundaries were and what I needed to truly understand is me and my needs in that moment. And so through that, that's when I started to go even deeper and got involved with Lumina Learning to do self-assessments. And through that self-assessment, I really discovered a lot more about myself and why I responded the way I did. So it takes you through, similar to DISC and Insight, the colors, but what they do differently is they now take it down to 24 qualities that you have and look at those 24 qualities across what you're like when you're most comfortable, when you're what you're like when you're at work, what you present to society, and then what you're like when you're stressed. And so through that, I got to really understand who I am and how I respond when I'm stressed and how I can change some of my behaviors. And that has been eye-opening for me as well and changed a lot of things. And especially the reactions from other individuals. I used to be a little fighter. So I would go in there ready to take out the boxing gloves and be ready to go in for a fight because I knew I was right. And now I've changed my behaviors and become much more collaborative, going, hey, let's talk about this. How can we make this work for everyone? And so it's been a journey. And I'll be very honest, it's been a painful journey.
I think there's a lot to be said about the complex dynamics that people have, especially when it comes to, the corporate world. Uh, there's a lot of really kind of unique social features that I don't think are carried over from maybe like personal life, such as like integrating responsibility into kind of the relationship that you have with someone, a boss and subordinate. The difference between the two might not be education or even experience, but uh, it can be something as really kind of hard to process as responsibility, right? You're responsible for the people under you, not just in terms of the work that they produce, but also, how they fare inside of your organization. You know, I I I do come from the corporate world. So Geoff, no shade to you, but I completely understand kind of how this works, and I distinctly remember expanding when I left the corporate world to be more of an entrepreneur and create my own business. I had a moment where I had to sit down and I had to think, okay, if I'm leading the ship, what kind of leader do I want to be? Right.
Mhm.
And I had to look back. There was no point of reference or context other than the leaders that I've had before in corporate America. And, the good ones were really, really good. They helped teach me a lot. They'd help, um, kind of consolidate the information that I really needed and created a space for me to be productive and understand. But they were very similar, it felt, right? They all shared characteristics. But the bad ones were they were all over the map and bad for different reasons. Uh I I just very quickly, I distinctly remember a manager that I had. And when I first joined the organization, I had to do like my trainings and things like that. You know, the whole rigmarole of how that might work. And I still remember this distinctly. It was day 2, the start of my second day at that firm. And I get a ping from my manager and he says, "Why aren't you doing XYZ thing?" And I say, "Oh, well, because I'm in training and it's mandatory." And then he calls me and he says, "Okay, I need you to pull up your scheduling thing to show me where it says mandatory." And then I pull it up. It wasn't there. You know, I'm new. I don't know the system. And he says, "Well, I don't see anything there. And so you're going to skip it or there's going to be consequences." I say, "Okay. As long as it's in writing." I have an email. I think I had a messages from him stating so. And I'm like, "Cool, whatever." And so I, I continue along my merry way. I'm doing the work, whatever. And then I get a message from the VP of training. She's like one of the most high up people at my firm, saying, "Hey, by the way, if you don't give me a good reason as to why you skipped your mandatory trainings, there will be disciplinary action." And I say, "Perfect." And I send her all the information. In my head, I'm thinking to myself, I'm just following orders. I'm just doing what I can because that someone else much higher above me told me to do that, right? But the reality is, I think very few people have the foresight to do something like that, or even have the luck to have those messages in the first place. And it causes a ton of problems, right?
Yeah.
There's very little that someone at, maybe a lower level, associate, intern, staff, um, can do to have leverage inside of an organization when a boss says, "Oh no, I didn't say that," or "I didn't mean that," or "I didn't want to do that," or "That's not what was supposed to happen." And really, the buck stops at leadership for figuring out how to make sure that everyone is treated equally within their ability to have a safe and productive work environment. Um, can you kind of like talk to us about maybe people who come to you and are starting to become self-aware of some bad habits? Something like, if that manager came to you and said, "Look, I messed up, but I don't know how to fix it. We're always super busy." How do you walk them through the process of, "Okay, you are not perfect now. You'll probably never be, but let's get you through from bad to okay, okay to great." How do you start
So,
that process?
so the big thing is them admitting that they have a problem. That's number
Mm,
one, because many don't. And that's unfortunate. And so admitting that you have a problem and you're struggling in an area is amazing because then we can start fixing. And one of the big things I would recommend in a situation like that is start to initially you're becoming an authoritative or a dictator by demanding that a new employee not take the mandatory. Well, let's start taking a step back and let's start being a team player and say, bring the whole team together and say, "Hey, how we're always busy. What are some things that we can streamline or make more effective so that we can reduce the busyness and be more effective at our jobs?" And when you start including the team on it, you're going to see a transformation within your team. It may take a little bit because you've lost the trust. They don't feel like you're a safe place. And you've got to now start to be vulnerable. And vulnerable is not a weakness and it's not manipulation. So let's take that off the table. But vulnerability is being human and saying, "I've made mistakes. I need you to hold me accountable to not do those same mistakes. And let's work together as a team to be effective." And you will be amazed at how innovative and creative teams can be when they're involved in the whole process. And you could profitability increases significantly as well. It's proven. So why not start making your team feel part of it and making them so effective that they outshine you as an individual, as a leader? That is the best thing that can happen. They can increase their knowledge base more so than what you have, and they're going to make you look great. But you have to be secure in yourself and in you as a human as well.
That's really beautiful. You make your team working so well that they eclipse you. That's really wanted to rebound on that. And Charles, you also said something very interesting just before. You said there are good leaders are a little bit alike, and bad leaders are bad in all in their own way, which reminds me of a quote that says, happy people are all happy alike, but unhappy people are all unhappy in their own unique way.
Yeah.
Then Jennifer, you said that one of the issue is that people need to admit that it's an area where they struggle. And I think this is a universal message of all domains of knowledge. As a speaking coach, I can never help people who believe they are good, but they're not. You just can't.
No.
And it's valid in every area, especially that most people out there don't even know that leadership is skills. It's not a position. It's not you're there and then you're a leader, which is something that I also learned the hard way when a few years ago I became president of a Toastmasters club. And from one day to another, I realized that, oh, whoa, I recognize how much I didn't know. Could say at least I was maybe humble enough to realize that I sucked. But it was really the beginning of the process, and more generally, every area in my life where I once noticed and admitted to myself that I was really, really bad. It hurts, but it turned out to be a benediction later on. It happened when I was young and I was shy, and one day I realized that that's not possible to be like this. It's not that I don't like people, it's that I fear of how I'm being perceived. And when I admitted that to myself, I cried a little bit, but then I started to work, damn it. And then it started. Leadership and what you do, Jennifer, there is something that is so profound, that developing leadership skills is not really about the person who's developing those skills, but it's for the others. And maybe this is why it's so hard to develop those skills, because it's different. And it's also skills that you need to apply. It's not about knowledge. It's not about applying a recipe, following a process. There is no right answer, because every time you apply something that you read from a book, then you realize that the other person, why don't they react as they react in the book? So can you maybe tell us how you do this, how you integrate that all situations are different, and that at the end of the day, it's not about following recipes, but it's adapting to people and to situations?
Well, now in today's world, you have to, as a leader, be so adaptable, and you can't be rigid in anything anymore because we've got AI, we've got gender differences. Like 5 generations are working in the workforce, almost 6. And you've got like neurodiversity. Like there's so much going on that you have to be adaptable, and you have to understand your team, and you've got to understand what motivates them. And with all the years of experience that I've had with in project management, where I've had all the accountability but no authority to be successful, I couldn't fire anybody. I had to figure out how to motivate each team member so that I could get the task done to be successful. And there's a ton of different methods that you can use. And I'll give a little secret tip. For if you're working with IT, you give them chocolates or food. They love that. So it's just understanding that. And so I could get a lot out of them, if that was their favorite chocolate and I go to them and say, "Hey, I need a favor. Can you help me out with this?" And they'd say, "How big is the favor?" And I'd slide over two chocolates. They're like, "That's pretty big." And then I tell them what it was, and then they're like, "That's actually three chocolates." So, but I go get them the third one so we get the job done and I can move up on the list of things to do. So it's just those simple little things of understanding what motivates teams. Others, it would be creating a plan for a roadmap for what we are going to do in the next year and sitting in a room and getting everybody to put dates around it and when we're going to accomplish things and just feeling part of the whole process. That they felt like they were part of this massive team and they worked on it together. And it's simple little things that you can do that I think so many don't even try because they so want to stick with the way things have always been. But the way things have always been isn't going to work anymore. And so that's where you need to change.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more about being flexible. And it's really funny that you mention the chocolates, because so I used to work in finance and in accounting, and we were always given food as kind of like a little kind of motivator, but it was always in a way that just didn't feel very motivating. Like they would buy us dinner, right? But we would be working till 3 or 4 in the morning. Um, and we would have had to get dinner anyways. So it kind of like didn't make sense. But the thing that I really like about your story and your analogy is that it was less of a transactional I mean it was a transaction in the like I guess colloquial sense, but like it was negotiated and it was in fun, and you both understood like, okay, the work has to get done no matter what, but let's have this little moment of fun and reciprocity that we can both enjoy. And contrasting that to me getting food and having to work till 4 in the morning is like it's night and day. And so I understand that, and I think there's a study out there somewhere, I can't quote numbers or anything like that, but that paying people more while on the initial onset of it, right, has a slight bump to their kind of their proactivity and their interest in staying, but ultimately doesn't affect retention, right? It doesn't make them stay.
Nope.
But introducing kind of more dynamic and personable kind of methodologies as to how you connect with your team increase both productivity and retention. And so I really, really like that you try to find these little systems and these ways to not just get along with the people that you're working with, or the people that you have under you, or that you have, that you have to ask favors for, but that you maintain a sense of, this is not me just paying you more and say work. This is me creating a relationship.
Yeah.
Um, moving into a little bit of technical detail here. When you start kind of working with these leaders, is there something that you find like particularly good leaders, even if they don't have, a handle on it yet, kind of like a traits or different kind of practices that they might have that really set them up for success?
I think the big thing is understanding their team and having that relationship building ability. And I've noticed that a lot of leaders don't have that, or they like to play the political favorites and because they hired their best friend to join them or whatnot. It's treating everybody fairly and equally and trying to work with the individuals because one way may motivate a couple individuals, but another way may motivate somebody else. It's you have to adapt to each one. And the key is being adaptable, especially in this day and age. And so that's where I'm seeing a lot of good leaders are, but I'm seeing a lot more bad leaders where they're micromanaging, they're arrogant, they they have all the charisma in the world, but they don't have the skill set to manage teams and to really make them effective and help them grow as an individual because their egos get in the way where they think, oh no, if they do better than me or outshine me, then that's going to make me look bad. But it really doesn't. It actually makes them look better and more effective.
Jennifer, there might be people who are listening to this episodes and who are either they are new leaders or they are already leaders for a while, but they didn't yet do the work to purposefully become better. I wonder if you could give them one of those high leverage tips that have a lot of impact when you didn't start yet. You know, one of those 20% effort to get 80% of the good stuff. Do you have
I
anything like this?
I think one of the biggest things that if you don't want to invest in yourself yet, one of the biggest things is to understand and watch yourself in different situations to see how you respond. And even ask people to give you feedback on how you're responding in situations because that is going to be the most advantageous and it's the foundation of any great leader is truly becoming more self-aware of you and how you respond because that's the big thing. And once you start to do that, then you're going to start to recognize different things in your own team members too, and how to better support them and walk beside them in their journeys as well.
So, I mean, just for my own personal understanding here, when we talk about good versus bad leaders, the main takeaway here isn't so much that it's experience, right? Because I think everyone kind of has this idea that the more you work with someone, the more you start to develop the relationship and you start to work well together and like each other and so on and so forth. And so by the virtue of just experience, you can develop relationships. But the real focus isn't that the relationship is built, but moreover, that good leaders take the time to develop a, uh, um, a relationship stemming from respect
Mm-hmm.
and kind of mutual cooperation from the beginning instead of just letting time smooth out those bumps. Whereas bad leaders might still end up uh, being liked by whoever they're working with after lots and lots of time together, just by virtue of okay, we're in this together, right? Um, but they have practices that might be a little bit more selfish, or attitudes that might uh not really be putting the team first. um I think that's the big distinction, right? And correct me if I'm
Yeah.
wrong.
Oh, totally. And the bad leaders, you're going to have higher turnover rates,
Mm-hmm.
guaranteed, versus the good ones. And here's a question for you, Charles, and you've
Mm-hmm.
worked in the corporate world, and even
Yep.
you, Jeffrey. How many exceptional leaders have you had in your career?
Like truly exceptional,
Yep.
maybe two, maybe. And I think of the amounts of bosses I've had, it feels like going into the hundreds, but at least, into the 20s, 30s.
Wow. Yeah, I think one customer who really makes you feel great. Yeah, that's
For
where
all
you
of Jeff's
notice.
customers, you
I
make
mean,
them feel
it's really hard to be
fantastic.
honest.
Yeah.
To be honest, when you say an exceptional leader, I mean, the chances are you never met anyone who are,
Well,
and then you
honestly,
don't know. How can you
well,
tell, Jennifer?
you,
How can you tell?
you can
How
tell because you're passionate about going to work and you're excited to go to work and you feel like you're part of the bigger plan.
Mhm.
Even if I said, okay, how many great leaders had you had?
okay, exceptional zero, a great one.
Well, no, I think she makes a great point though, because I'm thinking about genuinely people that not have only changed the trajectory of my career,
Hmm.
but that also made me excited to be there. Right? I had a boss way back in the beginning of my career, and I was doing the grunt work as most people do when they start, and it, it was filling boxes, checking things on Excel, whatever. And I hand it back to him, and he says, "This is wrong, but I want to understand why you did it the way I did it." And of course, I'm terrified. I'm like, "Oh God, I did it wrong." And I told him, "Oh, I just copied what we did last year." And he's like, "Oh, okay." And then he sat down and explained what to do first and foremost, but then why we do it,
Yeah.
right? And so I finally had this understanding, and I was getting this really cool concept, and that was kind of the basis of our relationship. He never kind of chastised me for doing the wrong thing unless, I did it multiple times after he explained it a bunch, but nobody's perfect. But most of it was just him saying, like, okay, you have to understand, you have to learn at some point. I need to teach you so that you have a better time doing it. And the reason that I bring him up is because at one point going into work was awful. It was one of the worst kind of feelings of like the Sunday scaries were uh real.
Yeah.
But when when he pinged me, I never felt afraid. I never felt like, you know, the world was ending. And a lot of times he, you know, put himself like on the line to protect me against my higher ups at that point. And it was to the point where I'm really grateful for what he did, both on a professional level, but now I joke because the favorite gift that I ever got someone was for him, and it said it was a mug that said the world's okayest boss. And and we joked about it forever, but the more and more I think about it, really, it was a tremendous experience because I got very early in my career to observe firsthand what it was like to have an exceptional leader, um, and working under him. And I think even now, whenever I'm working with a team or there's someone under me, or I have some kind of capacity for leadership that needed to be there, I sometimes find myself thinking, okay, what did he do? How can I do that? Um, so to answer your question, very, very few exceptional leaders, but it's one of those things that I think if you have one, you very, very clearly know.
Yes. Without a shadow of a doubt.
Such
And
a
that's the
mature
average,
answers now.
that, yeah. And that's the average answer I get is two.
Wow.
And to me, that's the sad state of affairs. And this is where we
Mm.
need to get into organizations and support the leaders, especially the up and coming, to be more effective because it does increase profitability for organizations.
And by the way, Jen, could you tell us a little bit more about what types of companies you are working with?
So I work with small to medium sized, even a few large ones, but I love the smaller and medium ones because it feels like I can be more effective that way. And they actually do see a lot of changes in their teams and they see value in the fact that their teams are working better together. And there's a level of trust that happens. And surprisingly, this will be a blind spot that nobody wants to mention, basically, is that 85% of leaders believe they're trustworthy, while 32% of their teams only agree with that. The rest don't. So that's telling the truth precisely where you need it the most. And that's a trust problem that needs to be resolved. And that's through self-awareness, because we're in a self-awareness crisis. We don't understand ourselves to be effective. And once you are, it's amazing to watch teams grow. And you, even in that room when we're doing a session, you're seeing all these little light bulbs. It's like Christmas tree going off in people's minds. And it's fun to watch because they're like, I now understand Bob over there. That totally makes sense about Bob. I now understand Susie. And I now get myself. And how can we work better together? And it's seeing those dynamics and it builds a stronger team and direction for an organization.
So I guess there are probably a lot of different things that someone can do individually on like a leadership basis to change themselves. But you know, organizationally, I think there's a big desire to have good leaders, right?
Mhm.
I think when you get to the nuts and bolts of it, I think very few organizations understand how to develop them, right? Because you can track a metric of, how much work gets produced per month and who's doing it and how, the efficiency metrics are very, very easy to kind of track. But I think the
Totally.
leadership metrics are much more nuanced, much more difficult to kind of consolidate and confirm. And then ultimately, and I would argue, much more important to understand. Um, so I guess from maybe like an organizational level, let's go one step above, outside of the idea of maybe direct leadership, but organizationally. What can these organizations look for, kind of measure, or even kind of build into their programs to uh, facilitate either understanding who is and who isn't a good leader, uh, and then supporting them?
So that's a loaded question there. Lots of answers. So, one, start looking at your turnover rate and then dissecting that into what areas are the turnover rates happening. Is it your HR department? Is it your IT department? Where is it? Engineering. Start in looking at those numbers. And then if you can see that there's issues, then start going to those leaders and start providing them coaches or advisors to help support them to become the leader that they can be. But I would highly recommend organizations stop putting people in place who are experts at a certain area, but may not be ready to be a leader or want to be a leader. Start picking or choosing people that are potential leaders, not based on are they an expert in their skill set, because it's really hard for a lot of individuals, especially in middle management, to stop being the subject matter expert and start leading the people beneath them, because now they have to be the functional business architect who has to look at everything. And they used to be able to focus on one thing, but now they're looking at everything. And now that's a struggle. And if you're not supporting your managers in doing that, then you're failing them. And it's time to stop that. Bring in people that can support them and help them to grow and become the leaders that your organization needs. And also, organizations, make sure you have a mission, vision, and values for your organization, because then the teams can create mission, vision, and values for their teams that align with the overall organization, which is huge. And I've even experienced it where the CIO of an organization didn't have that. He constantly changed the foundation. I didn't know where I was going and what I was doing. And I was trying to protect my team and build trust with them, but couldn't because he, in the middle of a project, would change the whole scope of the project. Well, that's not effective. And so, with that, he wanted to renew my contract. I told him no. And he went to the consulting firm I was with and said, Jennifer's not renewing her contract. And they said, well, was she rude about it? And he's like, nope. Was she unprofessional? No. Well, what's the problem? Nobody's ever done that to my face and said that. And so you need to bring in people that are going to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And you're going to have to start to be tough in those areas.
So it seems, Jennifer, when you work with a company, you work at all levels. It starts from the top, making sure that we have a vision, we have common values, common goals, and then from the teams, making sure that they're aligned with the company goals and values, but that they also have their own internal set of values, I imagine, because all teams are different. So it gives you a complete overview on how a company is working and where there might be problems. You told us that one of the main symptom of bad leadership is high turnover. Are there others that companies should look for and that they could see as a trigger to bring someone who can help them with that?
Trying to think right off the top of my head, but turnover is your big insight. I would also start to do a feedback to understand what is happening in the departments. A lot of employees don't like doing this because it doesn't appear to be anonymous, but getting honest feedback to find out what's going on and talking to the individuals. And maybe instead of doing surveys, is going face to face. But that depends on the organization too, because that's a tough one. Because not everyone feels safe, and they have to feel safe in order to do it. And maybe your profitability isn't very high. So that can be an indication as well, because you don't have innovation and creativity happening. And you may not have the right diversity levels in there. And when I say diversity levels, I mean, it's there's all kinds of studies out right now about if an organization has 30% female leaders, they are much more creative and innovative than an organization that doesn't. But we need both men and women in the functions across. Ideal, it's 50-50 because you need the men in there to be decisive and know what they're going for, and you need the women to have the empathy, and it brings out different skill sets in both.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, there's so much to be said about being able to be flexible and diverse, and consistent about excellence when it comes to leadership. Um, but I think, one of the hardest ways to do that is starting at the individual level. And, we talked a lot about on this podcast recognizing when either something is wrong or, putting it a different way, when you should be growing and when you should be doing something, developing something different. Geoff and I started this podcast because we were both very naturally inclined to talk to incredible people like yourself. And selfishly so, that's what we really wanted to do. But we also found that the most valuable thing that we can do, bringing these incredible people to an audience, is to figure out how to give them something that they can take away. And in doing that, we decided that we would ask every one of our guests about a skill that someone out there right now listening, they might be starting their career, they might be somewhere in middle management, or they can be somewhere in transition, but they still need to grow and develop as an individual and as a professional. But what's one skill that they can start working on today to help them get to that exceptional leadership level?
The one skill is self-awareness. If you can start working on that, and if you need to, do a self-awareness assessment to support you, but do it small. Start out small. Don't do everything big bang, because you're not going to be successful. Always do everything in baby steps, because that's where you're going to repeat things over and over until you get it in your head, and then you move on to the next. That's how you're going to be really amazing. But I would highly recommend self-awareness, because that is foundational for everyone, especially in leadership. And we're all leaders at some level in our lives.
Self-awareness. Wow, that's so powerful. Jennifer, thank you so much for having shared all this knowledge, all this wisdom that I'm sure will help many people out there to be more effective leaders, and obviously also help everyone around them. There is still one question that I would like to ask you before we go all eat our chocolate. It's a question that we ask all of our guests. Jennifer, I will now hand to you the magic microphone. And the magic microphone is magic because it allows you to leave a message to everyone who's on the planet, people who are already here, or even people who are not born yet. The magic microphone is your way to leave a universal and timeless message. Of course, you can take as long as you want to think, because we will cut the blank that it takes. What do you want to tell everyone?
So being an authentic leader isn't about perfection. It's about creating genuine human connection through honesty and transparency.
Wow, that succinct, but incredibly moving and incredibly powerful. I think we have a big responsibility to understand not just how we can take care of ourselves and how we can do well for ourselves, but how we can bring others with us for the ride to success. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate talking to you and all of your wonderful insights on leadership.
Thank you for having me. I loved every minute of it.
Fantastic. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you stuck around this long, please make sure to like, subscribe, send it to a friend who maybe needs a boost in their leadership or kind of wants to see what the difference between a good and bad boss is. By the way, Nick, if you're listening to this, thank you so much for being an awesome manager.
Beautiful.
Make sure to catch us every Wednesday with wonderful and incredible people like Jennifer. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.